So far, everything we've been doing to make him point at this random location and the random breathing, it's all been applied to the default pause. So this is just the A pause. But whenever you're doing procedural animation, whenever it's going to be used in different situations, so for example, this looking at a point might be used on all animations, it's worth testing how that looks when it's applied to different poses. So rather than having to go through the animation blueprint and inputting a different pause, what we can do is just go to the preview scene settings, and under preview controller, we'll select use specific animation. And then the animation that we select under here is what's going to be the default. So when it comes into forward solve, it's going to be using whatever we set there and then making the modifications on top. So I'm just going to look through the animation list, and you can pick a different one if you want. I'm just going to see what animation to test with. So let's try the idle. So now he's in an idle pause. And what you'll see is if we unhook forward solve, he does have some motion. So this is an animation. It's not just a single pause. And I'm going to connect that back up. But you'll see what's happening is it's modifying the input pause where he's just standing stationary but with some subtle movement. And now he's pointing still to look towards this point. But it's still playing the rest of the animation. So you can see his hands are still moving as they would be in the idle pause. But in addition to that, his head's moving and his spine's moving. And also the chest is breathing. And the way that you would actually use this animation when you're doing it in the game is you would have to set up the animation blueprint. So rather than just a control rig node, you would pass in this animation. So I'm just going to quickly go through that, and you can follow along if you want. So I'm going to, firstly, I'll go to the character. So that's mannequins, meshes, and I've got the SKM Mani. And that's why I want to create a blueprint using this. So what I'll do is I will right click on the skeletal mesh and I'll do create. And first we'll create the anim blueprint. So anim blueprint. And if you double click on this, you can then right click, search for control rig as we've done before. Click on that, select your control rig class. So in my case, it was the SKM Mani control rig. Connect it up to the result. Compile, and now you'll see there was some change on this. You might not have noticed, but if I disconnect it and compile, you see he's like that. Connect it back up, and now he's been modified slightly, and he's also breathing now. But if you want to input an animation that you're going to modify, let's find the idle. So we drag that into the anim graph, and then you just plug that into the source. So that's just being provided as the source, so whatever goes into control rig. And then control rig does its changes, and then it outputs the final pause. But let's say that we wanted to control the position that he looks at. Currently, it's just this position as set by this look target control. So we can drag it around in the viewport, and that's all good within control rig. But to use this in an actual game, you're going to want to pass some information about the point that he should be looking at. So the position in the world which he's looking at, and that goes into control rig, and then that will move his head and his spine to point towards that location. So rather than using a look target, because I prefer not to use controls for this, I'm going to go to the My Blueprint tab and create a new variable, and this is going to be a vector, and I'll rename this to look target vector. And where we're using this look target control, which is here, this get transform control, we're going to replace it with this look target vector. So we drag that in and do get look target vector. And we're going to plug that into the add node. So that's the only time that we use this control. So we've just replaced that one usage. And you'll see that we don't use it anywhere else. It's all just connected through to this particular node here, or it was originally this, but now it's this look target vector. And what we want to do is make it so that this is editable from the outside. So this can be edited in the anim graph. So in the anim graph, we want to be able to plug in a value which will set this look target vector so that we can change it dynamically at runtime. And the way we do that, let's just compile. And if you click on the variable, you want to tick instance editable. So now that we've ticked that, if you go back to the animation blueprint and select your control rig node, you'll see that you have these inputs. So I'll just expand that out. We've got the look target vector, which we just created, which we want to use, but we've also got the inputs for the controls. And I'm not going to use those, but just as a bit of information, you can control and move the controls as inputs, and that's by default. So anytime you've got controls in Control Rig, so when we created the controls by right-clicking on the bone, those can be modified simply by ticking in the animation blueprint on the inputs. You just tick use pin and then you'll be able to plug something in. But we don't want to use those. What we want to use is our look target vector. So I'm going to tick use pin just on look target vector. And now you'll see that we've got a value that can be input into this. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can convert it from a world space location into rig space. So what we will want to do is take this look target vector and we'll assume this to be in world space. So we'll pretend that we've just put in some world space location. So let's say it's 0, 0, 0, and he's trying to look at the center of the world, wherever that may be. So what we want to do in Control Rig is, instead of just using this value directly and plugging it into the add node, we're going to drag out and do from world to convert it from a world location to a rig space location. And then it's outputting the rig space location, or global as it refers to it as, which I think is a bad name. And we're going to take it from there into the add node. Then we're going to compile and save. And now in our animation blueprint, whatever we plug into this as a world space coordinate will then be passed into Control Rig here, convert it from world space coordinates into rig space, and then everything will carry on as normal. So to test that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new blueprint that just contains the SKM Mani. So I'll do this in the tutorial content folder just to keep things more organized. And this is where I've actually got the Control Rig, so it makes sense to do it here. So I'll right click, blueprint class. You can do a character or an actor. In this case, I'll use a character, and I'll do human character test and double click on that. And for the mesh, we want to select our mannequin mesh. So we'll scroll down to skeletal mesh asset, SKM Mani. I'll just move this around to position it a little bit more realistically. And I'll turn snapping on to rotate it 90 degrees. And what we want to do is we've got the animation mode set to use animation blueprint. So what we want to do is find this SK mannequin anim blueprint that we created. So that's here. I'll select that. And now you can see that his head is having some troubles. So we can compile, save. So now it's using this animation blueprint, but we've not got anything plugged in to this look target vector. So for now, let's just leave it at 0, 0, 0. And whilst here it doesn't look good because it's targeting 0, 0, 0 in this space, but if we drag him into the viewport, and we press simulate, you'll see that he's pointing and he's looking at where 0, 0, 0 is in the world. And if we move him around, you'll see that he carries on looking at that same point. So if we just move him, it's quite difficult to see because of this character. But I'm just going to move the character whilst holding shift so that the camera moves with it. And you can see that he's looking towards 0, 0, 0 in world space.